Hello, it's Jack Tutor here of Attention Magazine. Welcome to Crucial Listening, the podcast where I speak with musicians and sound artists about 3 albums that are important to them. My guest this time is Matana Roberts, who is currently in the midst of this album series called Coin Coin, which is some of the most dense and deep and wonderful music I've listened to in the past few years. I mean, the most recent installment, she's currently on number 3. That's the most recent one to come out. It's just unbelievably layered. I mean, sometimes I'll listen to it on headphones and tell myself that I'm just going to focus on the sounds at the back of the frame. And suddenly I'm hearing layers upon layers of sound that have never come to my attention before. These compacted layers of history, of instrumentation, experimentation. There's a mixture of spontaneity and the present tense and lineage and identity, and there's too much to describe here, but please go and listen to Matana's music. Also, next week, so beginning of May, speaking from the time at which this is going out, Matana is conducting a live collaboration tour with Kelly Jane Jones as part of Outlands, which is a network of producers. So Kelly and Matana will be starting with a residency at the Cube in Bristol before touring the country with a collaboration and also a series of workshops. So they'll be hitting places like Bexhill, London, obviously Bradford, Salford. Please do go check out that collaboration. I mean, I've seen both perform individually and they're amazing. I cannot wait to hear the result of those two energies colliding. So you can find out more about Outlands over at outlands.network. You can find out more about Matana's music at matanaroberts.com. And you can find details on Matana's picks over at attentionmagazine.co.uk/crucial listening. I loved speaking to Matana. It was such a pleasure. And I really think you'll enjoy this conversation. There are a couple of moments where the Skype signal went a bit crackly, and so Matana becomes slightly indistinct, but it clears up. Those tend to be in the second half. Hopefully they won't distract you too much, because it's a really nice conversation. All right, enough babble. Matana Roberts on Crucial Listening. Hello, Matana. Welcome to Crucial Listening.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I want to start by talking about this collaboration that you're going to be doing over here in the UK, in fact, with Kelly Jane Jones, as commissioned by Outlands. My first question is how you guys were brought together. I mean, was it something that Outlands took care of, the pairing of you two, or was there any involvement from your side on that?
Yeah, it was something that Outlands and the booking agency that I work with, Q Junctions, had tossed around and asked me about. And I had been on a few festivals where Kelly Jane was also playing. And we actually split a bill and hung out a little bit. And I really like what she's doing in her whole process and how she thinks about things. And then it just came up sort of naturally via Q Junctions and then Outlands, and then it was put to me, and I thought, oh, that's a lovely idea. I would love to do a lot more collaboration than I've gotten to do in the last couple of years, and so it just feels kind of the right moment, the right time to try something new.
I was really excited to see that you'd be working with Kelly Jane as well. I've been in raptures from having seen her previously when she's played, and also with yourself, and I think that melding of minds is going to be fascinating.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking. I like in collaboration. I like to learn, and I look forward to what it is I might learn. I think she's a very special musician.
Yeah, I mean, do you know how you're going to spend? Because it starts with like a residency period. Is that right at the Cube?
Yes.
And do you have any thoughts on how you might use that time, or I mean, is it just going to be a matter of playing with each other?
No, it's going to be a matter. It'll be a matter of playing with each other and kind of getting to know each other sonically, and then maybe trying to build from there. But however, whatever it will be, it will grow organically over the. I think we have 10 dates or so in that tour. So there's no particular goal in mind, and there's no particular, but there's also no particular kind of rules or framework or sort of noted thing that we're trying to go after, I don't think.
And you're playing, from what I can see, some really interesting venues. I mean, some places I'd not heard of, and it turns out that they've only been open a couple of months, like some brand new spaces and some theatre spaces, some more venue type spaces, and obviously the Cube has got that lovely kind of cinema vibe to it. I mean, you're someone who, I know when you came over before, you've toured, a particular set of material throughout various different spaces. I mean, what's the experience been like for you to take like an idea or a concept and see how it handles in different spaces? I mean, do you feel the imprint of different environments upon the work and what you're doing?
Yeah, I really like using the space as a kind of external instrument. I always see that as sort of a thing. I used to do a lot of solo shows in abandoned buildings, broken down buildings, and places like that, and kind of got into this idea of how the architecture is also not only a space in which to inhabit, but it's also a space that is making its own sound, and that you really have to plug into that environment as well as the witnesses around to really get the idea of what is happening in real time. I feel really privileged in that I get to experience my sonic travels in different types of spaces, some that, that are very common and that that's where, you would see me doing something, and some places where you might not know about, but that are just as interesting or may not actually be fit for quote unquote performance, but can be made an actual accessory to whatever's happening in the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I heard that you did a project actually quite recently on a similar line. Is it out in public, I think? Was it like a residency near the end of last year?
Yeah, that was in the middle of Madison Square Park in New York City, where they allowed me to use the park as kind of my workspace and work in real time. And I, for many years, I mean, I haven't done it in a while, but I've made my living in the beginning of my career as a street musician. And so playing in streets and subways and things, and having this constant interaction and interruption type practice moving along with kind of my sonic explorations. And there's something about that makes me feel a bit more alive sometimes. And the residency in park, people, they made me feel a bit more alive and dangerous than I'm used to feeling, which was interesting. Because it's just a different, America right now is just, there's a fervor and a negative kind of vibrance that, to me, there's an edginess that I've never seen before. And so that residency in the park, I felt that really for the first time.
And so in terms of almost using that negative energy as a friction with which to play with, you mean?
Yeah, it's sort of like that weird, I keep talking to people about the Black Panther movie because I have so many problems with it, but there's this one thing where this one character, whenever someone throws violence at him, he retains that violence, and then that violence becomes his to throw back out of the people, and he's twice as strong or 3 times as strong or blah, 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 blah. And I think about that. That's a weird analogy, a weird pop culture analogy, but I think about the negativity that people were giving me in the park, for instance. That's something for me to internalize and reform into something else. You know, that saying about, like, it's not what happens to you that matters, it's how you respond. And so it's that kind of constant negotiation. And as an improviser, there's just something really thrilling about trying to work through those different ideas.
Also, as well, I guess, as a saxophonist, I mean, I've seen you talk about how the saxophone acts as almost like an extension of the human voice. And I guess there's almost like this amplification aspect with the saxophone, which isn't maybe so apparent than with, say, I don't know, a violin or something. It's, I don't know, it almost feels like it's projecting the voice almost in quite a direct way rather than simply being an instrumental conduit. I don't know if that makes sense, but I wonder if that's the source of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a part of it. I mean, the saxophone was created to mimic the human voice. It was also a military instrument, if you think about it. It was used in a lot of kind of like brass band, military band style sorts of things when it first showed up. And it has that sort of thing where it somehow, the sonicness of it seems to grab people's attention, whether their attention is positive or negative. From what I've, found out, the great saxophonist Henry Threadgill, I read an interview where he was talking about how he was playing tenor saxophone. He used to play tenor saxophone in these churches. And it wasn't until he started playing alto saxophone at these church revivals or whatever, that people started getting the Holy Ghost. And the alto saxophone has this very particular thing about it in terms of how it can grab people. And I always think of that story because that story goes along the lines of the same things that I think about in terms of dealing with the alto saxophone and how much it is, I don't know, reflective of the human experience, sonically speaking.
Yeah, I watched a video of you earlier, and there was a point where you were about to play like a solo piece, and you just did one bleat of one note, and someone went, woo, like in the crowd. It's like instantly kind of got a jolt of energy simply just from having one note from this instrument. It was great.
No, that's really something. And that's, yeah, I love the alto saxophone. It's at the base of everything I do. And it's just got that thing.
Yeah. And in terms of the other things you've got on the horizon, I see that you've also got a exhibition coming up called Jump at the Sun in New York.
Yeah, so I make these large graphic scores and mixed media collage pieces that I like to use in a lot of my composition work, but I also like for them to sit as objects. And so Jump at the Sun will be kind of just more work in that vein that I've been working on, that I've been trying in sound and trying not in sound, and just asking other musicians to consider, asking myself to consider, mostly more so works in progress, because I feel like my whole practice is just a constant work in progress. But it's a really exciting gallery. Friedman Gallery is really fascinating. The proprietor there, Ilya Friedman, is so supportive of what it is I'm trying to do. So I'm really looking forward to that.
I don't know if this is a naive question, or obviously you're in the midst of such a big project with Coin at the moment. Mm-hmm. How much of that contributes to the sense that everything's a work in progress? I mean, do you think you still have that sensation once all of those 12 installments have been realized?
Yeah, that Coin is a beast.
Yeah.
It's a beast. It's knocking me all over the place, and that's good. That's what your work is supposed to do to you, right? And I feel so privileged that I've been able to focus on that work and keep that work moving. But I will say, when it's all said and done, I think I still will feel as if it's a project that is a work in progress, because it's really it's a series of documents. Really, it's that seem to map major cornerstones for me in my development, but also in my personal life and everything. Like, it's kind of wound up in everything that I feel that I am as an arts person, and so. Yeah, I don't know if I could give you a good answer to that question, because it's ever evolving.
Yeah, I mean, it's been so great to keep abreast of where that project is headed, and I guess as well as a listener, I mean, I understand that there is a framework that's already mapped out for the project and has been for some time, but as someone who's discovering the project as each installment comes out, each installment is blowing open the parameters of what the project is, which is amazing. I mean, how much of your time is spent with Coin at the moment in terms of cultivating the next installment?
It's constant. And so, like, it's everything. It's kind of the foundation for everything else, really. This year for Coin, I mean, Coin 4 has been recorded, and I'm just kind of trying to figure out how I want to mold it for the listener. There's some things that I want to communicate through it that I want to make sure are clear. So I'm grappling with that right now. But it really is the foundation. All my other work is kind of built around that. So this year, there's a lot of travel involved. I'll be going to Africa to see some of the slave ports in West Africa for the first time, something I've never wanted really to do, but I feel like I just really want to do that. I'm going to be doing weird experiential things like taking a ship trip from the United Kingdom to New York City just to understand that feeling of being on the ocean transatlantically, something I've never experienced. I'll be doing more research in Scotland and Ireland and Wales because I seem to have there's some Welsh history involved in this project that I wasn't really aware of at first. And I'll be going to Indonesia for the first time later this year to kind of get more of an idea of artistic practices that sit as cultural practices and how that's kind of fanned out into these really interesting arts collectives that are existing in places like Jakarta and some other spaces that kind of connect back to the work, reverberating around migration. To me, the work is constantly about this idea of migration. So I'm constantly culling research, looking at documents, just dealing with data. I'm obsessed with data. I've decided that that's actually what's really going on. And I'm just trying to cull more data and constantly writing and editing, picking things apart, picking ideas apart, and then kind of scrambling that all back into the alto saxophone and pushing out new reflections of that to consider with musicians.
Well, I realized that you mentioned right at the start of this that it would be nice to take a break and talk about some music, and I've spent the last 15 minutes talking about everything.
This is totally fine. Yeah, totally fine.
Well, you have given me a list of 3 albums that you considered to be important to you, and thank you for doing that. I'm interested to hear if there is any particular means by which you considered the term important when you produced that list. I mean, was there any kind of, I don't know, definition that you had in mind where you thought, okay, this is what makes a record important to me, or?
Yeah, Jack, to be honest with you, it was a nightmare.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. It kept me up at night. I was like, how am I going to choose just 3? There's no way. And that word important, if you think about it too much, I started to think about it too much and was like, well, there are recordings that I consider important, but they're not necessarily recordings that I want to talk about. And I decided that important, I'll pick records that to me, that just have, I feel very sentimental about them. And that to me, that sentimentality is important because it gives me a push to keep doing this thing that I'm trying to do, because like putting your work out or your writing or whatever, your artistic practices, it's really like wearing your heart on your sleeve, And these particular recordings for me, they just represent, one, musicians and artistic people that I deeply admire, but also who I feel really are trying to go for something, just really try to go for it, and that, risk everything. And to me, that's what's most important about an art's life.
I definitely feel that sentiment coming through in all of these. if you'd like to pick the first one you'd like to talk about, Matana, and tell me a little bit about why it's important to you as well.
Well, I guess, how about Hannah Marcus's Desert Farmer?
Sure.
Two things. I love all the musicians on that record. All the musicians on that record represent a certain time span in my head and a certain kind of sound and a certain sort of like discovery of community and friendship. I love the way that the record was recorded sonically. The way that it sounds is just really beautiful. Hannah she's very, very special. She is, to me, an incredibly underrated is not the word I want to use. Underrated is wrong. She is an incredibly humble person, a humble arts person who I feel not enough people know about these records.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I feel. Yeah. And I wish, I've heard grumblings that she's working on new material, but I just really like the textures, the overall sound, kind of this mix of just like a touch into Avant sonicness, but then back into this sort of singer-songwriter, really fluid, melancholic lyrics that really speak to me. And maybe speak to me of another time, I'm not sure. But when I hear the music, I feel something. I feel a certain sense of community. I just like lyrical writing where I can tell that the person that's writing these lyrics likes to read books, and like enjoys dealing with language. And so from a lot of her records, I get that. I can hear that. I can tell that. And I just feel like what she's tried to put forth on all of her recordings is actually, it's just a really giving experience. Yeah, I think that's all I can say about that record.
Yeah. I mean, can I ask about that time of your life? You mentioned that it's got particular ties to a particular period for yourself. I mean, I guess it wasn't too long after you were on the Godspeed record, was it? Was that a couple of years before?
I can't remember what year. Let's see. I'm looking that up right now, actually. What year was that Godspeed record? That Godspeed record was probably
2003?
Yeah, 2003 makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, right. Wow, 2003. Yeah. yeah. I guess, those were my kind of beginning New York years, really, in a sense. I mean, I had moved to New York in maybe 2001, 2002. And so that was the beginning of something. And maybe it's when I hear that record, I can hear what that felt like. There was a certain sort of like newness to possibility in those kind of upstart years. And in those few years, I met people who are really some of my oldest friends and who've always kind of stood by me, regardless of whatever. They're just like solid. And then that Godspeed record actually happened in Chicago. Yeah, that's just a really interesting time period of me getting some understanding of what might be possible. I think I was working in a bookstore at that time, playing on the streets and the subways, living in a room that really should have been a closet in Queens, and biking all over the city, and having no money to do really anything but finding ways to do really, really cool stuff. And most of the people that I met around that time, everybody has gone on to do they're still doing really interesting work. And so I think that's why this particular record has a certain sort of sentimentality. And then, yeah, it's got some of the Godspeed folks on the record, as well as some people associated with Godspeed, but not in Godspeed. So I see that. I believe I'm trying to see where it was recorded. I don't remember if it was recorded in Montreal or not. But yeah, maybe the reason I love it so much is it feels like family music. Those people, they are my family, a lot of the folks on that record. I would die for them.
And their voices come through so distinctly as well. Like, I knew, even without looking it up, I was like, I recognize those instrument tones. And, I mean, Jessica Moss as well, like, her violin felt so distinctive when it came in. I was like, I know which part is Jessica. It was...
Yeah, that was what was so hard about picking these 3 records, because I actually was going to pick her new record because I love that record.
Yeah. Wow.
And then I was like, I love that record. I love that record so much, and she is one of my biggest heroes. She is living the creative life in the way that I feel it should be lived, and that is, risking everything, taking as many risks as possible, and building those risks through a community. But I decided on this record because this record, I'm still sort of exploring Jessica's new solo work, and this record I still listen to all the time. It's silly, but I listen to it all the time. All the time.
Why is that silly?
Well, because it's like, I don't know. There's so much music. There's so much great music to check out and listen to. People putting out great records every day. It's dizzying trying to keep up, but it's also really exciting. And why am I choosing this record that was so long ago now in a sense?
Yeah.
But this idea of importance and what has been important to me and things that I've listened to that have made me feel some strange kind of psychic support. This was one of those records. And so I was like, I just have to choose this. And when I hear Jessica, her sound is so distinctive. When I hear Hannah, her voice to me has this distinctive quality that I can only attach to her voice. Raymond, the dog that's doing vocals, I knew that dog.
Oh, wow.
So I love that dog, and I had a very special relationship, and so it was just really amazing to hear those barks and be like, that's not just any bark, that's Raymond. I know this barks, and Hannah Marcus is someone who I feel is also, she has like this hypersensitive curiosity where she's always checking out all sorts of things that I find really fascinating. And that I also feel is important to living an artistic life in terms of going after the things that you're most curious about, whether they fit within the construct of what they're supposedly supposed to fit in or not, because that's the way that I work also. I'm just always weaving in and out of different areas of curiosity for myself and then weaving that back into my creative output. So there's something that I recognize, some sort of kinfolk or mirroring that I recognize in her artistic output and just in the way that she lives her life.
Yeah, I mean, when you mention the fact that this record hasn't been heard by enough people, there's a severity to it which made me quite surprised, and considering it, like you say, with the personal involved, that it hasn't been circulated more widely, or I haven't heard someone say, look, listen, check this album out. Because yeah, I mean, that second song, or I guess the first song proper, blew me away. Like, I haven't felt that shaken by a song in quite a while. I mean, do you have I don't know if it's a cruel question to ask of someone who, has such an attachment to this record as a whole, but do you have a favourite song at all on this album?
Oh, I love Desert Farmers. That is one of my favorites. I do love Laos, and I'm not sure if she pronounced it Laos or Laos. I can't remember. But Desert Farmers really speaks to me. I love the opening interlude. That to me just sets things forth. But I think her record is an example of what happens. People are putting great records every day. and it's like Russian roulette of who falls between the cracks,
Yes.
of what recordings fall between the cracks. And I think that this is a prime example of a record that just fell in some crack and just did not get just did not get passed around in the way that it should. And, that's something that with the Coin work, for instance, I had to be really careful about when I was looking for a label to put out that music. It was a really scary, scary, scary thing because I knew that could happen. It's just a series of different types of events that could happen. And if the word doesn't get out enough about something that you've made, then it may fall between those cracks also. And the wonderful thing about working with Constellation is they're just so on it.
Yeah.
I've worked with a couple different record labels, and I tell you, I've just never, the passion and fervor that they have for getting the word out on their roster's work stuns me every time.
Yeah. And they really mean it as well by the sounds of it. I mean, I've spoken to Ian and like the enthusiasm. And in fact, we were talking about your work. I mean, the enthusiasm with which he talked about your music, and I think it was Eric Chanot as well at the time. Just it's so clear that they're putting everything into that.
Yeah, they don't. It's serious business. Like they don't. They put artists on their rosters whose music and output they really personally deeply like, and it just shows in how they care about it. Because this work, the Coin work for me, is my legacy work. When I think about, like, if I have to think about legacy, like it's that special to me, and I like putting it in someone else's hands is a really scary thing every time I have to do that. And they are so in my corner about whatever it is I'm after. And yet they also don't put any pressure on me really to do things in a certain way or do things by a certain time or blah, 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 blah. They really just kind of ride organically with the artists. And they've shown me nothing but respect and a ton of love, really. There's a lot of love all over that label. They really love their artists, and it shows.
Well, we should talk about your second record, Matana, if you'd like to tell me the name of it and, a bit about why it's important to you as well.
Let's talk about Stockhausen. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. This record, it's like vitamins for the brain. I listen to this record and I just like your eyes just pop open, your ear, everything just pops open. Yeah. Like there's a new funnel of psychic information going on listening to this record.
Yes, from like the first second as well.
Oh, I love it.
Do you remember where you first heard this?
I feel like maybe the first time I heard it would have been 1999, maybe 1998. And at that time, I believe I remember in university, I had a composition teacher who pulled me aside and said, listen, music is just not going to be your thing. Like, let's find something else or there's something. I was a music performance major. It's just, you're not going to survive and then I heard this piece and I was like, what? This is what I'm after. Like this sonic fabric. This is what I'm after. This is music that to me sounds like every risk possible is being taken in real time. And as a as an improviser and being really steeped deeply in improvised musics, I also feel like that's a part of the motto of dealing with that music. So I see a symbiosis between the two. And then, and then I go in and out of not listening to his work for quite some time and then going back again and checking out scores and looking at things and then going back in and going back out and seeing like the confusion that people have around him about, he was a composer mystic, all these things that people attach to him. But he's really someone who just had ideas.
Yeah.
He had ideas, and he was determined to make sure that they got realized. And I think whether they're ideas that people agree with or not, and whether, he got a lot of criticism also, some of which I think was needed. But I just really admire people who have a vision, and they have a vision and they see that vision through in an artistic kind of way of being. So I listened to this particular recording. The first version, actually, I like better than the Europa version. But I listened to this and I go, right, 1962, 63, 64, 65, whenever it was. Right. Think about that.
Yeah.
Let's think about that. Let's talk about that. And all of this legacy work that he left, it's just really interesting to dig into it and kind of wash yourself in it and use it as ways in which to reconsider the sonic world.
Yeah. As you say, it's amazing that he followed this through, and it sounds like he had some roadblocks along the way, in the fact that I think at one stage the musicians that were due to be playing it rebelled and said, we're not doing it, and they had to cancel a performance. And people, which I imagine is every composer's worst nightmare, just people being like, look, we're not into this is ridiculous. And then I think people, like the audience, thought that they were being mocked when the applause started from the musicians, and there's a lot of fuel for uncertainty and for throttling back and not doing it, I guess.
I love work that has so many different tunnels that you can travel down to try to figure out what the hell is going on. And there's just something really special about that. And I also can relate in that I've had dreams about musicians leaving in the middle of my gigs, but that's never happened. but I have had, witness audience people leave or complain that, that this is too difficult, or, what is this that she's doing, or I want my money back, or blah, blah, blah. And I love it. I love that because
yeah,
it's, and the same thing, like in the park, that residency in the park, like when people would come over to me and start complaining, I just turn things up louder because I want people to be critical thinkers. I want people to be critical listeners. I want them to get some idea of what their likes and dislikes are, and then be challenged by those likes and dislikes. I love that about the human experience. And I feel with Stockhausen, there was just so much of that that he dealt with. Even until the end, and yet still such a confusing figure for so many, even for those who, of us composers who should know better is not to be confused about certain things, but there's still, an area of confusion that I find really fascinating.
When you had that lecturer say to you, like, listen, maybe this isn't for you. You said how, when you're in the park and people complained or pushed back, you wanted to go louder. Back then, was the situation similar in that did being told this isn't for you make you want to more fervently push forward with it?
Well, I have to tell you, as an African-American identified person raised by, my dad was a scholar and political activist. My mother was a community activist and scholar as well. And I just was raised in an environment that I was told to question anybody that questioned my validity at trying to do anything that I wanted to do. That if I had the will to do something, that was enough for me to keep trying. And sometimes with the old college stuff, because I got a fair amount of negativity in those environments, with the exception of one. But early on, I was suspicious of anybody telling me that I couldn't do something. And then at the same time, sometimes I say to myself, well, maybe those lecturers actually were practicing some kind of reverse psychology. And they knew that if they said this to someone, then that person would, flip things back around and work harder. And that's doubtful. But that's one way, to think about it. But I was just always raised to side eye anyone telling me that I couldn't do something artistically that I really wanted to do. And so it prepared me better for the life that I've going after, like making adventurous music. And a chance piece that I premiered at a gallery in New York maybe years ago, and it made one of the musicians really angry. And so he was also having a really bad day, I think, so you also have to take that into account. But it's really interesting to have to work with that kind of energy and realize that you have to figure out some way to remold that to fit the moment, to fit the space. And we were able to work it out in many really difficult. And so I think these earlier experiences I've had have just helped me to understand that to be human is complex, and taking things personally is not the way to live an art life. And you learn to filter in the things that you can use and learn to filter out the things that you can't.
We have one more record to talk about, Matana, if you'd like to give me the name of it and why it's important to you.
Oh, we're talking about Joël Leandre and Derek Bailey's series of duo recordings that I think were part of like 2 sets at a club in Paris. I think it's called No Waiting.
Yeah.
And I just don't even know where to start with those two. I don't know if I can talk about them together, if I should talk about them separately. Joël Leandre is just the ultimate. To me, as an improviser, she is the ultimate, and she has a passion for what she does that is clear. And every performance I've ever seen, and every record that I've ever heard, I've had maybe 2 or 3 conversations with her, and I remember I ran into her in maybe Switzerland or somewhere. We were on the same festival, and I said to her, Joël, you don't ever take rest. Like, you're so busy. She had contacted me about playing a show with her that was literally 2 years away. Oh, and I remember saying to her, I was like, Joël, 2 years away, I don't book that far in advance. And so when I ran into her in Switzerland or France, wherever, I was like, Joël, don't you ever take a rest? Like, you're so busy. You're booking things, having to book things 2 years in advance. And she says, but I have a passion. I just have a passion. And she's right. She has this unwavering devotion to experimentation for experimentation's sake, and for making sure that her voice is out here and is clear and is just standing tall in its defiance. And I really relate to that. And then Derek Bailey, he is my favorite. I have to say, if I have to pick a favorite improvising guitarist of from the past, in a sense, he is my favorite in terms of the sonic sculpturing that he seemed to be naturally able to access in ways that I've never quite heard on guitar until I started listening to him. So the combination of both of them together is explosive to me. It's just it's really quite explosive. It's a meeting of minds. It's a meeting of people who are on the exact same wavelength, but yet are individually so different in how they approach things in real time.
And again, it seems like, I mean, I found a quote from Derek Bailey which actually feels like so pertinent to a lot of what we've talked about today, where he basically says that if there are no difficulties, it seems that there's no point in playing. And, you know, the things that excite him are trying to make things work. And when it does, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I love hearing that strain of things just about coming together, kind of against the odds almost.
Yeah, it's very special.
And Joelle, I'd never really... I mean, Derek, I've heard some of his recordings. I'd never heard anything by Joelle. Like, I watched videos of her as well. She is amazing.
Yeah, Joelle, she is a beast. I mean, it's beastly. She is not... She takes no prisoners. And I just feel... She's very vocal. She's just a very vocal... person, and it also shows within the music, and her devotion to her instrument is so clear. And I think, again, this is a record I picked because she's built a really fascinating, and is continuing to build a really fascinating body of work, regardless of being known or not known, or getting the word out in a certain way or not getting the word out in a certain way. She is dedicated to the doing. And that is something that I feel like this dedication to the doing is getting lost sometimes in this like constant on world that we're in right now as arts people, where, yeah, we've got to do the doing, but we've got to do all this other stuff too in order to support the doing. Yeah. To me, she does those other things, but she always puts the doing first. And I just feel like listening to that record, listening to her, and also listening to him, just his sense of adventurousness reminds me of why I do what I do.
And have you played with Joelle yet?
No, she did ask me to do something, and again, like I said, it was 2 years in advance, and I was forever kicking myself and saying no, and I apologized to her when I ran into her that time. I said, because I'm just not used to being asked. I have some things booked already in 2019, but at that time, I think it was like 2017, and she was asking me something about 2019. And the only person that I do that with actually now, well, right after that maybe, is John Zorn and the Stone in New York. Like I have a booking at the Stone in New York in 2020. It's just he works that way, and I'm used to working that way. But internationally, I was not used to working that way. And after I told her no, I was just kicking myself. Like, what? You don't say no to Joelle Leandre. You don't say no. You just say yes, and you get there, because there's an important lesson that she is a master, and it's important to play with these masters who are still on a constant search, but they just have a rootedness that other musicians, like of my contemporaries, for instance, that we don't have. And so it's just important to connect with these master musicians.
coming up on time, Matana, but thank you so much for spending time to talk to me about these records. It's been fantastic for me and really enlightening listening experiences I've had on the back of these as well. So thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for talking to me. Sorry for my loquaciousness, but it was a joy to talk about music.
Oh, I'm so glad. If people want to find out what you're up to, is there a best place for them to be headed?
Well, yeah, I have a new website, www.matanaroberts.com, that finally, it's taken like a year and a half to get this site off the ground.
Looks good though.
No. Yeah, it looks pretty good. I had a crazy experience. Not a crazy experience. I wanted it to have more bells and whistles, but you know what? Forget the bells and whistles. Come to the shows. Go listen to the records and go support more people who are making adventurous music and taking lots of risks and risking it all instead of looking at the bells and whistles on my website.
That's a great lesson to end it on, I think. Thank you, Matana.